Hello, friend. Don't look behind you while I'm telling you a story. Story 1. Under the pale moonlight, the old wooden house stood alone in the middle of a withered rice field, like a forgotten shadow lost in the stream of time. Rotten planks creaked in the night wind, like whispers from someone desperately trying to tell a story no one wanted to hear. Wild grass grew tangled around a crooked fence, and the scent of damp earth mixed with the faint aroma of old incense drifted through the cracks in the door, as if the house itself were breathing. The villagers a few miles away never passed. By after dark, they said this place didn't belong to the living. They said something still lingered within the walls, in the flickering light of an oil lamp hanging from the porch, though no one ever lit it. Lynn, a young Vietnamese-American journalist, didn't believe in local superstitions. She came here because of an anonymous email sent from an untraceable address, detailing a disappearance from 30 years ago. Go to the house at the edge of the rice field, the email said. It will give you the answers. Lynn wasn't easily frightened. She'd written dozens of investigative pieces on everything from slum murders to Wall Street corruption. But there was something about the tone of that email, a chilling coldness, as if the sender didn't just know who she was, but also knew secrets she had never told anyone. She arrived in the village in the late afternoon, as the sun bled red across the sky. The locals eyed her warily. Some shook their heads when she asked for directions to the house. Don't go there, girl, an old street vendor whispered, clutching a wooden rosary. It's not a house, it's a trap. Lynn smiled, thanked her, and drove the rental car down the rutted dirt road anyway. She didn't believe in ghosts. She believed in truth. And truth, she knew, often lived in the darkest places. The house came into view just as dusk gave way to night, the field swallowed in black. Lynn stopped the car, headlights casting the facade in stark relief cracked wood, a tattered curtain fluttering in a broken window. She turned off the engine, stepped out, and felt a chill seep through her jacket, even though it was midsummer. The constant chirring of insects suddenly fell silent, as if the entire field was holding its breath. She pulled a flashlight from her bag, its beam sweeping over the porch, stopping at the oil lamp hanging from a rusted hook. It was burning a small, steady flame despite the stillness. Lynn frowned and stepped onto the porch. The front door was ajar, the wooden slats groaning like bones grinding together. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air was heavy, suffocating, as if time had stopped flowing. The floor was thick with dust, but faint footprints small, like a child's led from the entrance deeper into the shadows. Lynn raised her flashlight, the beam falling on a small wooden altar in the corner. On it sat a faded black and white photo of a young woman with a melancholy smile. Before the photo was an incense bowl, the ash still warm, as if recently lit. Lynn's heart quickened. She didn't believe in ghosts, but she recognized that scent, the same incense her mother used to light on memorial days, a smell forever linked in her mind with grief. She moved closer to the altar, noticing the photo bore no name, no date, only the woman's eyes, seeming to stare directly at her, even though the flashlight was angled off. Who lit the incense here? Lynn whispered, her voice echoing. In the empty room, no answer came. Only a soft creak from upstairs that, despite the unease prickling her skin, she decided to keep going. The narrow staircase to the second floor groaned under each step, like it resented her presence. At the top, a slightly open door let through a faint sliver of light. She pushed it open to reveal a small room where moonlight spilled through. A broken window onto a tarnished mirror hanging on the wall. The glass was cloudy, scratched, but as Lynn looked into it, she didn't see her reflection. Instead, she saw a child standing behind her, long hair obscuring its face, dressed in a torn white gown. Lynn spun around, heart hammering, but there was only emptiness. She looked back at the mirror. The child was gone. Only her reflection remained pale, with sweat dotting her forehead. You're imagining things, she muttered, but her own voice sounded strange, shaky. She left the room, deciding to go back downstairs, but as she descended, She heard a faint melody, a child's voice, singing a lullaby, slow and disjointed. "Mommy, come back to me. Mommy, don't go." Lynn froze. The flashlight trembled. In her hand, the singing was coming from the altar. She turned back. The beam of light landed on the photo. The woman's eyes no longer looked sorrowful. They now burned with resentment, drilling into her. Lynn stepped back, bumping into a wooden chair, knocking it over with a loud crash. The sound shattered the silence, and the singing stopped. In its place came the sound of footsteps, light, deliberate, from the staircase. Lynn turned, flashlight scanning each stair, but saw nothing, only darkness, and the unbearable feeling of being watched, as if dozens of unseen eyes stared at her from every corner. She tried to stay calm, opened her bag, and pulled out a notebook. The anonymous email had mentioned the name Wang, a girl who went missing in 1995 after being forced by her family to marry a man she didn't love. Rumors said Huang had taken her own life in this house, but her body was never found. Lynn looked at the photo again. Could it be Wang? If so, who built this altar, and why? She decided to search the house for more clues. In another room, she found an old wooden trunk with a rusted lock. Using the flashlight's handle, she broke the lock and pried it open. Inside were old dye garments, a few handwritten letters, and a small cloth doll with eyes sewn from. Red thread. Lynn picked it up. A cold sensation crawled from her fingertips up her arm. The doll smelled strange, not like old fabric, but like dried blood. She set it down and unfolded one of the letters. The handwriting was crude, like a child's. "Mommy doesn't love me. Mommy left me. I'll keep Mommy forever." Lynn's throat went dry. She swept the flashlight across the wall and saw strange scratches, as if someone had clawed at it with their fingernails. Just then, she heard laughter, childlike, high-pitched, but hollow, coming from the mirror upstairs. Lynn didn't want to go back to that room, but she knew she had to. She climbed the stairs, each step heavier than the last. The mirror room door remained open, and the moonlight was brighter now, reflecting off the glass like silver. She stepped closer, peered into the mirror, and this time the child was nearer. Its hair still obscured its face, but its lips moved, whispering something. Lynn leaned in, trying to hear, and the words echoed inside her mind, cold and clear. "Mommy, why did you leave me?" She stumbled back, heart pounding. She wasn't anyone's mother. She'd never had a child. But the voice didn't just echo in her head, it filled the room, as though the house itself was speaking. She turned and ran down the stairs, but the front door was now shut tight. She didn't remember closing it. She yanked the handle. It wouldn't budge. Behind her, the child's laughter returned closer this time, right behind her. Lynn spun around, flashlight flailing, and saw it. Small figure standing at the altar, head bowed, hair covering its face. "You're not real," Lynn screamed, but her voice cracked. The figure looked up, and Lynn saw its eyes' empty sockets, deep and black, pulling her in. She stumbled back, hit the altar, and the incense bowl crashed to the floor, ashes swirling. In the air, the figure stepped forward slowly, and Lynn felt her body grow heavy, pinned down by something unseen. She tried to run, but her feet wouldn't move, as if the floor had turned to mud. Then came another voice, a woman's, hoarse and filled with pain. "Give me back my child." Lynn turned. The photo on the altar was no longer of the young woman. It was her. Her own face, her own eyes empty, like the child's. She screamed, but no sound came. The child was now inches away, its tiny hand touching hers, icy cold. "Stay with me, Mommy," it whispered, and Lynn felt her consciousness fading, as if being pulled into a void. She remembered the email, the final line, "You cannot leave. No one leaves." She realized too late that this house didn't. Just keep Wang it kept everyone who entered. It wasn't a house. It was a curse, a cycle of grief and rage, and now she was part of it. The next morning, Lynn's rental car still sat outside the house, but the house itself was empty. The villagers didn't dare approach. They only whispered about the oil lamp that still burned on the porch, though no one had lit it. Inside, a new photograph had appeared on the altar, beside the old one. It was Lynn, her eyes staring forward, her smile faint, as if waiting for the next visitor. Story 2. Raindrops tapped softly on the yin-yang tiled roof of the ancient shrine, which perched precariously on a hillside where fog curled like ghostly white ribbons. The red lantern hanging above the shrine's gate glowed dimly through the rain, casting blotchy reflections like diluted blood. The scent of damp earth and aged incense clung to the air, thick and heavy, pressing down on the chest of anyone who passed by. The locals in the small town at the foot of the hill called it the Shrine of the Forsaken, though no one could recall exactly who was worshipped there. All they knew was that whenever it rained, the bronze bell inside would ring. Despite its rope having rotted away long ago, Daniel, a Vietnamese-American documentary filmmaker, heard about the shrine from an old friend at a coffee shop in Saigon. The friend spoke in a lowered voice, saying the shrine once served as a refuge for those fleeing war, but none who entered ever survived to leave. If you want to make a horror film, the friend said, go there, but don't bring your camera. It doesn't like being watched. Daniel had laughed, clapping his friend on the back, but the man's eyes were deadly serious. Daniel didn't believe in ghosts, only in stories waiting to be filmed. With his expensive Re-Aid camera and a backpack full of gear, he rode his motorbike along the winding mountain road toward the Shrine of the Forsaken. The night he arrived, rain poured as though trying to drown the entire hillside. Daniel pitched a small tent beside the shrine, his flashlight illuminating the moss-covered stone walls etched with strange characters, neither Vietnamese nor Chinese. He jotted down in his notebook, possibly ancient spells or scripture. He wasn't superstitious, but the silence of the hill, broken only by rain and distant insects, gave him the unsettling feeling of being watched. He stepped into the shrine. The heavy wooden door opened without a sound, as if freshly oiled, though the place looked abandoned for decades. Inside, the air was frigid despite the humid rain outside. A stone altar dominated the center, upon which sat a small statue of a woman in traditional O dye. Her face had been eroded to the point that no features remained. In front of her hung a small bronze bell, suspended and still. Daniel raised his camera, switching to night mode, the green glow of the screen casting eerie shadows around the altar. But the display was filled with static and flickering white streaks, as if the camera couldn't focus. Must be the humidity, he muttered, though his voice echoed oddly in the empty space, like someone repeating after him. He decided to stay the night, setting up his camera in a corner to record everything. As he checked his equipment, he noticed the camera's battery had dropped to half, even though he had charged it fully before leaving town. He replaced it, double-checked his settings, and began recording audio. In the darkness, the sound of rain became rhythmic, like a slow heartbeat. But when he slipped on his headphones to monitor the O, he heard something else. A voice, low and fragmented, whispering through the sound of water. Don't look. Don't look. Daniel yanked the headphones off and scanned the room. Only shadows and rain. He turned on his flashlight, sweeping the beam around the shrine. Nothing but stone walls and an altar. He told himself it was the wind. But when he played back the recording, the voice remained clear now, like someone speaking directly into the mic. Don't look into my eyes. He shut off the device, a chill creeping down his spine. He didn't believe in spirits, but he knew some things defied explanation. He decided to examine the altar more closely. At the base of the statue, he found a small wooden box engraved with the same characters as the walls. Inside was a round mirror, just the size of his palm, its bronze frame oxidized green. When his flashlight hit it, the mirror didn't reflect his face, but a void, a darkness that swallowed the light whole. He stepped back, dropping the flashlight. It rolled across the floor, casting wild shadows that danced over the statue. In that instant, he swore the statue's face changed it. Now had eyes, hollow and staring straight at him. He picked up the light, heart pounding, and looked again. The statue was as before featureless, unreadable. But the bronze bell was now swaying gently, though no breeze stirred the air. He turned on the camera, hoping to capture it, but the screen only showed white streaks, like something was blocking the lens. He shut it off and made the decision to leave. The rain outside still fell in torrents, but he couldn't remain another minute. As he stepped through the shrine's gate, the bronze bell rang, a sharp, metallic sound like bone striking metal. He turned. From a distance, his flashlight caught the altar again. The statue now faced him directly, though he knew it couldn't move. He ran back to his tent, stuffing his belongings into his bag. But when he opened it, the mirror was inside, nestled among his gear, though he didn't remember taking it. He threw it to the ground, but it didn't shatter. It simply rolled into the darkness, catching the red lantern's light on its surface. Like a blinking eye, he jumped on his motorbike and hit the ignition. The engine growled, then died. The bell rang again, louder this time, as if no longer inside the shrine, but right behind him. He turned. In the lantern's dim glow stood a figure, a woman in an odai, her long hair obscuring her face, unmoving in the rain. He screamed, but thunder swallowed his voice. The figure stepped forward slowly. When she raised her head, he saw her eyes identical to those in the mirror. No pupils. Just two deep black voids. Daniel didn't remember how he got down the mountain, only that when he woke, he was in the town's hospital, soaked and scratched, clothes torn. Locals had found him unconscious by the roadside. His backpack and camera were gone. They told him he was lucky to be alive. No one who entered the Shrine of the Forsaken ever came back whole. But Daniel didn't feel lucky. Every night when he closed his eyes, he saw those eyes again. The bronze bell still echoed in his head, a constant reminder that he had brought something back with him. He checked his email, hoping for some clue, and found a new message. No sender. Just a single line. "You looked into my eyes." He deleted the message. But every time he looked into a mirror, he saw her behind him closer each day. He knew, sooner or later, she would be close enough to touch him. Story 3. Cold winds swept through the night market, carrying the scent of fresh fish, smoky aromas from street vendors and something else, and earthy rot, as if it rose from deep underground. Paper lanterns swung overhead, casting dim yellow light onto narrow stone alleys where hawkers' calls mixed with the chatter and laughter of the crowd. But in the farthest corner of the market, beyond the reach of light, stood a small, shabby stall roofed with palm leaves, its entrance concealed by heavy red cloth. Locals called it Baba's shop, though no one knew who Baba was. They only knew that if you needed something you couldn't find elsewhere, a charm to drive away bad luck, a bottle of medicine for a strange illness, or even a curse, Baba had it. But the price was never money. Emma, a Vietnamese American anthropologist, came to the market researching folk beliefs for an academic paper. She'd heard about Baba from a colleague who described the stall as a doorway to things you're better off not knowing. Emma didn't believe in superstition, but curiosity drove her. With a notebook and voice recorder in hand, she pushed through the crowd toward the market's darkest corner. The red cloth at Baba's stall hung heavy, as if soaked in water, though it wasn't raining. Emma pulled it aside and stepped inside. The air was thick and stifling, scented with incense and something sweetly rotten, like decaying flowers. A single candle flickered on a wooden table, casting light on an old woman seated behind the counter, her silver hair neatly tied back, her eyes cloudy as if veiled in mist. Baba didn't look up as Emma entered, continuing to weave a small net from red thread, her fingers moving so fast they blurred. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice low and brittle, like dried leaves scraping against stone. Emma explained she was studying charms and local beliefs and hoped to interview her. Baba gave a thin chuckle, the sound like tearing paper. "You're not here to ask questions, girl. You came because you need something." Emma frowned, ready to object, but Baba's gaze silenced her. Those eyes weren't clouded as she thought. They were deep, like dry wells pulling in the candlelight. Baba set the net aside and slid a small wooden box across the table. "Open it," she said. Emma hesitated, but curiosity won out. Inside was a silver necklace etched with strange patterns, centered by a black gem that shimmered as if lit from within. "It will give you what you want," Baba said, "but you must wear it now." Emma smiled awkwardly, thinking it was just a sales tactic. She put it on, and a chilling sensation from the gem spread across her chest. "What's the price?" she asked, reaching for her wallet. Baba shook her head. "You'll know when the time comes." Emma left the stall, feeling the weight of Baba's gaze behind the red cloth. But when she turned around, the shop was gone. In its place was a patch of darkness between stalls, as if it had never existed. That night in her small hotel room, Emma couldn't sleep. The gem on the necklace felt heavier, pressing against her chest. And whenever she closed her eyes, images flickered through her mind. A desolate field, an old well, and a shadowy figure with long hair covering her face. She sat up, grabbed her recorder, hoping the interview might explain something. But when she played it, all she heard was static like wind through dead branches and a whisper. "You chose me?" Startled, she dropped the recorder. She tried to remove the necklace, but the silver chain had tightened, cutting into her skin and leaving red marks like blood. She ran into the hallway, knocking on staff doors, but no one answered. The whispers from the recorder continued, even though it was off clearer now. "You can't leave me." The next morning, Emma returned to the market, determined to find Baba, but no one had heard of the stall. No one remembered an old woman selling charms. One street vendor eyed her nervously. "You're wearing that thing?" he asked, pointing to the necklace. "Take it off now, or you won't be yourself much longer." Emma explained what had happened, and the man shook his head. "Baba isn't human. She's a spirit trapped by a curse. What you're wearing is her eye." Emma laughed, thinking it a joke, but her smile faded when she felt the gem pulse, like a heartbeat. She rushed back to her hotel and looked in the mirror. Her eyes were no longer their familiar brown, but pitch black, just like the gem. She screamed and yanked the necklace, but it tightened further, choking her. That second night, the whispers turned into commands, urging her to go to an old well on the town's outskirts. She didn't want to, but her body moved as if controlled, her footsteps heavy, drawn by an unseen hand. The well stood in the center of a barren field, its mouth covered in moss, bottomless. She looked down and saw a face in the dark hair, own but not quite, with black eyes and a twisted smile. "You chose me?" said the voice, not from the well, but inside her head. Emma stumbled back, falling to the ground, and realized she was no longer alone. The woman from her dream stood before her, hair covering her face, holding a red net identical to the one Baba had been weaving. "Give me back my eye," the figure said, and the gem on Emma's chest burned hot, searing her skin. She didn't. Remember how she escaped, only that when she woke, she was in a hospital bed, the necklace gone. The doctor said she had collapsed from exhaustion. But Emma knew the truth. She left town the next day. Still, every time she looked into a mirror, she saw a faint figure behind her, and her eyes had dark specks like ashes suspended in water. She deleted her research, burned her notebook. But the whisper never left. "You are mine," it said. And Emma knew Baba's price had never truly been paid. Story 4. The flickering light of the campfire danced across the high treetops, casting twisted shadows that writhed on the gnarled bark, like they were trying to crawl free. The deep forest was silent, save for the soft crackling of burning wood, and the whispering wind threading through the leaves, as if telling stories no one wanted to remember. The scent of pine resin mingled with the damp earth rising from the forest floor, evoking a sense of both comfort and dread. Decades ago, this forest had served as a haven for people fleeing war. Now it was a destination only for the reckless or the desperate. Anna, a Vietnamese-American freelance photographer, came here because of a strange invitation. An old friend, Now a tour guide had sent her a short message. There's an ancient temple deep in the woods. Go shoot it, but don't stay past midnight. Attached were GPS coordinates, followed by one final sentence. Don't touch anything. Anna wasn't superstitious. She had taken photos in supposedly haunted places, abandoned houses, cemeteries, derelict hospitals, and had found nothing but dust and silence. But there was something in the tone of the message that chilled her, as if her friend wasn't just warning her, but pleading. She set up camp near a small stream, about 1 kilometer from the temple. As the sun set, the forest grew colder. The air thickened and clung to her skin like something alive. Anna checked her camera, adjusted the lens, and began hiking along the narrow trail marked by the coordinates. The path was blanketed in dry leaves, leading her beneath a dense canopy where moonlight could barely slip through. She heard the sound of flowing water in the distance, but layered beneath it was another sound light, rhythmic, like wood tapping. Not from trees, but from up ahead. She stopped to listen. The tapping ceased. When she moved again, it resumed, keeping just enough distance to stay hidden. Anna turned on the flashlight mounted to her camera. The beam swept through the underbrush, but revealed only leaves and shadows. Probably an animal, she muttered. But her voice sounded thin and alone in the night air. The temple appeared without warning, as if it had grown from the dark itself. It was small, its stone walls blanketed in moss, roof tiles crumbling, yet its main gate stood firm, its faded red paint carved with strange patterns resembling human eyes. Anna raised her camera, snapping a few shots. The flash lit up the carvings, and for a moment, they seemed to blink. She stepped through the gate, the coldness of the stone floor seeping through her shoes. Inside, the air was dense and unmoving, heavy with the scent of old incense and rotting wood, as if the place had been sealed shut for decades. At the center stood a wooden altar, and on it a small Buddha statue, not with the usual serene smile, but a warped expression, twisted in pain. In front of the statue sat a small metal box. The lock was rusted, but it bore signs of having been forced open recently. Anna took photos of the altar, but when she checked the screen, all the images were foggy, as if a layer of mist had formed over the lens. She frowned and cleaned it, but it was spotless. Must be the lighting, she murmured, though her words echoed strangely, as if the room repeated them. She approached the altar and noticed deep scratches in the wood wall, jagged, like made by human nails. She switched her camera to video mode, hoping to document the details. But through the screen, she saw a figure, a thin man in tattered clothes, standing just behind the altar, even though she was sure she was alone. She spun around, flashlight cutting through the air, but there was no one there. The screen now showed only the altar, no trace of the figure. Her heart pounded, but she told herself it was just a trick of the light and her imagination. Despite her unease, she decided to open the metal box, even as her friend's warning rang in her head. Inside was an old sutra book with peeling leather cover and a small bronze bell, etched with the same eye-like patterns from the gate. Anna touched the bell. It rang, a sharp, metallic sound that cut through the air like a blade. Instantly, the tapping noise returned, louder now, closer, as if someone were knocking from inside the walls. She backed away and dropped her camera. The screen shattered, but the flash remained lit, casting harsh light on the statue. Its face had changed now. Longer paned, but furious, the eyes deepened into hollows that stared directly at her. She grabbed the camera and ran for the gate, but it was now shut tight, though she couldn't recall closing it. She tugged the handle. It didn't budge. The tapping had turned into pounding from all directions, walls, floor, ceiling-like. Dozens of hands slapping wood. She turned back. In the flashlight's beam, she saw the man from the screen, now standing before the statue, head bowed, hair covering his face. "Who's there?" She shouted, but her voice was drowned in the sound of pounding, which grew to a deafening roar as if the temple itself was trying to break apart. The figure raised his head. She saw his eyes black, bottomless, no pupils like twin voids swallowing. Light. Give it back, said a hoarse voice. Not from him, but from the bell still clenched in her hand. Anna flung the bell and scrambled toward a broken window, climbing through without regard for the glass tearing at her hands. She ran through the woods, the pounding sounds trailing her, merging with the wind and her hammering heartbeat. When she reached the campsite, the fire was out, though she had left a large pile of wood. Her backpack was shredded, and inside it lay the bronze bell, untouched, as if it had never been thrown. She screamed and hurled it into the stream, but as moonlight touched the water, she saw the man's reflection behind her, closer now, his hand reaching forward. She ran without looking back, not stopping until she found the trail out of the forest. By morning, villagers found her unconscious by the roadside, scratched and bruised, camera destroyed. They told her she was lucky no one who entered that temple ever returned alive. But Anna didn't feel lucky. Every night, she heard the tapping, soft but relentless, as if reminding her that something from the temple had followed. She burned. Her photos erased her notes, but whenever she closed her eyes, she saw those eyes again, and the bell no longer in her hand, but still ringing in her mind, calling her back. Story 5. A cold, damp breeze whispered through the thick canopy, carrying the moist chill from deep within the earth, as if the land itself murmured secrets no one wanted to hear. Nanjiao, a remote town nestled deep in the mountains of Yunnan province, China in the late 1980s, was not a place one lingered in. Red dirt roads wound into the town, often shrouded in mist that blurred the old tiled roofs and moss-covered stone walls. The townspeople lived quietly and spoke little, their eyes always drifting away from strangers, as if fearful of something that might cling to them if they stared too long. Rumor had it that Nanjiao was once home to an ancient shrine dedicated to an unnamed deity destroyed during the Cultural Revolution. No one knew who that deity was, but the eldest of the town still spoke tremulously. The shrine had not only been demolished, it was cursed, and whatever remained beneath the earth still waited, still lingered. Li Ming, a young journalist from Shanghai, arrived in Nanjiao in autumn of 1987, not out of belief in ghost stories, but to investigate a strange disappearance. A group of archaeologists led by Professor Wang had vanished without a trace after excavating a plot of land near the mountain's base ground said to contain the foundation of that ancient shrine. Ming, with his youthful curiosity and arrogance, assumed it was a mere accident or an exaggerated legend fueled by local superstition. He brought an old camera, a notebook, and the conviction that logic could explain any truth. Yet, as the horse-drawn cart jolted along the trail into town, a chill ran down his spine. Despite the daylight, the people of Nanjiao did not welcome him. Glances darted from behind windows, whispers died off when he asked for directions, and even the innkeeper, an old gaunt man named Qin, looked at him as though he had stepped up from the grave. "You shouldn't stay long," Qin rasped as he handed over the room key. Nanjiao is no place for outsiders. Ming merely gave a faint smile, suspecting the old man was warning him to guard some secret. He didn't believe in ghosts, but he believed in truth, and he was determined to uncover it. His room was on the second floor, a small space with a window overlooking the dense forest encircling the town. That first night, sleep eluded him, not because the bed was hard or the air stifling, but because of a strange sound, like dry tapping coming from somewhere within the walls. He flicked on the light and searched the room, revealing nothing but cracks in the wooden panels and a damp, musty smell. He told himself it was wood contracting in the cold night. Lying down again, he heard it more clearly, as though someone were tapping fingernails on a hollow surface. Ming sat bolt upright, heart pounding. He threw open the window, hoping for fresh air to dispel his fear. Outside, he saw a figure standing beneath an ancient tree not far away. In the dim moonlight, the figure was motionless, head bowed. Ming called out, but no response came, and when he blinked, the figure was gone. The next morning, he asked Chan about the archaeological site. The old man shook his head. No one dared approach it anymore. They uncovered something they shouldn't have, he said, his milky eyes fixed on Ming. You go if you want, but don't say I didn't warn you. Ming didn't heed the warning. He took the map left behind by the archaeologists, a crumpled scrap of paper found in their abandoned camp, and set off up the mountain. The trail was rough, covered with dry leaves and scattered rocks. The air grew heavier the deeper he ventured, as though an unseen weight pressed on his chest. He discovered the excavation site at midday, when the sun was high yet weak through the dense fog. It was an open clearing with abandoned pits and tools strewn about, evidence that Professor Wang's team had fled in panic. At the center stood a large stone slab, etched with strange glyphs, upright like an unnamed tomb. Ming felt gooseflesh. As he touched it, it was icy, even under the sun. He raised his camera and snapped a few shots, but looking through the viewfinder, he froze. For a moment, he saw a figure reflected in the stone, standing behind him. Spinning around, there was no one. His heart hammered, but he convinced himself it was fatigue. That second night, he began meticulously recording his observations. He noted that the glyphs did not resemble any ancient language he'd studied. They curved and twisted as though carved by a trembling hand, and the longer he stared, the more they seemed to slither across the stone like small serpents. Dismissing his dread, he tried to focus until the tapping in his wall resumed. This time, it was steady, like a heartbeat, and he sensed it came not from the wall, but from within himself. He switched on the light and opened his notebook, but his hand shook too violently to write. A new sound followed, not tapping, but whispers, as though someone stood directly behind him, reading over his shoulder. He spun around, but the room was empty. On the third day, he searched the town for clues, knocking on doors and questioning villagers about the archaeological team or the old shrine, but no one would speak. Only one elderly woman on the outskirts agreed to talk. Frail, she sat in a rickety wooden chair, gripping a worn prayer bead mala. They broke a curse, she whispered, her voice weak but sharp. The shrine wasn't just for worship. It was a gateway, and when they destroyed it, they opened the path for that thing. Ming asked what she meant, but she only shook her head, panic in her eyes. Don't go into the forest at night, she said. It will see you. Ming didn't believe superstition, but he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Each time he passed through the forest, he sensed eyes in the darkness. That night, he dreamed of the stone slab. In his dream, the glyphs on the stone glowed red like blood, and from beneath the earth, a cold hand gripped his ankle, pulling him down. He woke in a sweat and realized the window in his room was wide open, though he recalled shutting it before bed. On the fourth day, he returned to the excavation site with only a flashlight, a knife, and his pen. The site had changed the pits, looked deeper, as though someone had continued digging during the night. At a far corner, he found something that stopped his heart, a muddy boot, identical to one worn by Professor Wang. Kneeling, he inspected it and shuddered. Inside was a severed foot, the flesh torn raw and mangled. He staggered back in horror, but before he could flee, he heard a sound not tapping, but the rustle of dirt and rock, and felt something crawling up from beneath the ground. He ran, without looking back, through the forest, over the red dirt tracks, and reached the inn, slamming the door and locking himself in. But the sound did not stop. It followed him, not from outside, but from within the walls. The whispers returned, now coherent in a language he did not recognize, repeating a single phrase. He switched on the light, but it only amplified the terror. On the wall facing his bed, glyphs identical to those on the stone slab began to appear, as if carved by invisible fingernails. They curled and glowed. Ming felt them staring at him as eyes that never blinked. He doesn't remember passing out. When he awoke, dawn had broken. The room seemed normal again. The glyphs were gone, wiped clean. But on his desk, his notebook lay open, filled with pages of red ink script, repeating a single sentence. You have seen me. Ming checked his camera. Every photo from the site had been wiped blank, except one. In that single image, the stone slab appeared clear, but beside it stood a faceless figure, pale and indistinct, its hand reaching toward the lens. He left Nanjiao that morning without a word to Cheng or anyone else. He rode away, but the feeling of being followed didn't dissipate. On the train back to Shanghai, he tried to write his report, but his hand shook uncontrollably, and he heard the whispers clearer now, as though that Bing sat beside him. He never finished the article. He never told anyone what happened, but Nanjiao never released him. Years later, after leaving journalism behind and living quietly in suburbia of Shanghai, he still heard the tapping at night. Not from the walls, but beneath the floorboards, beneath his bed, from inside his chest. One night, unable to bear it any longer, he opened his closet and retrieved the notebook from Nanjiao. Flipping through the pages, he saw the red writing had changed. No longer did it say, "You have seen me." Now it read, "I am you." He never left that house again. Neighbors say they see him standing motionless at his window at night, staring at the ground as though waiting. But no one dares approach. They say that on moonless nights, you can hear the dry tapping coming from his home, like someone or something trying to escape. Story 6. Under the blood-red light of sunset, the small town of Yuan, perched high on a remote plateau in Sichuan province in 1992, looked trapped in time. Dry dirt roads wound between gray stone houses, where flickering oil lamps cast their pale glow. Through small windows, the locals lived withdrawn lives with few connections to the outside world, and for good reason. Yuan had once been the home of an ancient temple, burned to ashes in a mysterious fire in the 1960s. No one knew exactly what happened, but the oldest residents still whispered about a sacrificial ritual interrupted, about a curse never lifted. They said that on wind-whipped nights, the temple bell still rang from underground, even though no temple remained. Clara Wren, an English botanist, arrived in Yuan that autumn to study a rare flower said to grow only on the cliff faces around. The town, with her short blonde hair and sharp blue eyes, Clara wasn't one easily swayed by folklore. She believed in science, what could be measured and recorded. Yet from the moment she set foot in Yuan, she felt an unnamed unease. The air felt heavy, as if each breath carried something out of the past. The townspeople watched her with guarded eyes, not because she was a foreigner, but as if they feared she would bring something or awaken something. She rented a small room in the house of Mrs. Ha, a widowed elder living on the town's outskirts. Mrs. Ha spoke little, but whenever Clara asked about the mountains or the flowers, she simply shook her head and warned, "Don't go up there alone." Especially at night, Clara chalked it up to superstition. But she couldn't help noticing how tightly Mrs. Ha clutched her wooden prayer beads while speaking of the northern cliffs. Clara diligently recorded the warning, not because she believed it, but because she wanted to understand why the locals lived in fear. On her first day, Clara began the ascent into the mountains, armed with a backpack full of tools, a notebook, and a spare flashlight. The trail up the cliff was rugged, strewn with jagged rocks and thorny bushes. Reaching the narrow ravine described in her notes, she found the tiny, silver-white blossoms clustered in crevices like stars, glimmering in the dark. But something else caught her attention. In the center of the ravine, half buried in earth, lay a large stone slab etched with strange swirling patterns, concentric circles connected by wave-like lines. A cold shiver ran down Clara's spine when she touched it. The rock felt ice cold, and it trembled ever so slightly, as if it had a pulse dot. She began photographing and taking notes. But as she studied the slab, her blood ran cold. The pattern seemed to shift in the dying light, the circles taking on the shape of wide-open eyes staring at her. Clara shook her head, telling herself it was just her imagination playing tricks in the dim glow. But as she rose to leave, she heard a deep resonant chime, not wind, but the distant toll of a bronze bell. She turned but saw only the slab and the quiet clusters of white flowers swaying in the dusk. That night in Mrs. Ha's small room, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, listening to the wind whistle through the cracks, and felt as if someone stood outside the window, though she checked, and no one was there. Then she heard the bell again, so faint it seemed to originate from within the walls. She sat up, switched on her flashlight, and the sound stopped the moment the light touched the room. Her notebook lay open on the table, though she'd closed it before sleep. One page was covered in messy sketches mirroring the slab's patterns, though she had no memory of drawing them. On her second day, Clara returned to the ravine, this time with a small hammer and a trowel, intending to carefully dig around the slab for clues to its origin. But the soil felt odd soft and freshly turned. Within minutes, she unearthed something startling, an ancient jade bracelet carved with the same swirling patterns. As she picked it up, a sharp pain stung her finger, a pinprick of crimson. A drop of blood fell to the earth, and she swore she saw the soil drink it up like a dry sponge. On the third night, Clara began to dream. In her dream, she stood in a temple unlike any she had ever seen. Its black stone walls were carved with vortex-like patterns, and at its center stood an altar bearing the jade bracelet, identical to hers. A faceless figure sang before the altar, in an unknown language deep and haunting, as if the voice echoed from the bottom of a well. When the figure turned, Clara saw its eyes, two spiraling vortices like the designs on the slab. She woke with her heart pounding and realized the jade bracelet lay on her table. Even though she was certain she'd stored it in her packed dot the next morning, Clara went to see Mrs. Ha and recounted the dream. The widow grew pale, her prayer, beads slipping from her hands and scattering across the floor. "You touched it," she whispered. "You brought it here?" Clara asked what it meant, but Mrs. Ha only shook her head, saying the bracelet must be returned to its rightful place before it was too late. "The temple didn't burn because of fire," she said, her voice quivering. "It burned because they tried to lock it away, but it never sleeps." Clara refused to believe the old woman's words, though her fear only grew. She returned to the ravine, determined to bury the bracelet beneath the slab. But when she arrived, she gasped. The slab was split down the middle, and from the fissure, a thick black liquid oozed, reeking of decay like the stench of death. She hurled the bracelet into the crack, but the moment it struck the temple, bell tolled once more, louder, shaking the entire mountain. Clara fled, feeling the ground shift as if something stirred beneath her. When she returned to town, Mrs. Ha had vanished. The home was empty, except for her prayer beads, which lay, broken in pieces on the table. Clara fled Yuan that very night, refusing to look back. But the tolling followed her not just in dreams, but in every silent moment. Years later, back in England, she still kept her Yuan notebook locked away. She never dared open it yet. Sometime at night, she heard pages rustling as if someone leafed through it. One evening, she summoned the courage to peek and found every blank page, now filled with black ink spirals, as though they were trying to escape the paper. Clara never returned to Yuan, but she cannot shake the feeling that whatever dwells below continues to watch and waits. The remaining villagers claim that on stormy, wind-whipped nights, they see a figure standing on the cliffside, a jade bracelet on its wrist and spiral-patterned eyes. No one dares climb up there anymore. They know that even though the temple burned, what lies buried beneath the earth has never truly gone. Story 7. Rain fell softly on the curved-tiled roofs of Changshui, a secluded village nestled deep in a valley in Gansu province. During the frigid winter of 1983, muddy paths wound through low, weathered wooden houses where dim oil lamps flickered behind. Torn paper windows. The villagers lived in near-total isolation, speaking little to outsiders, as if trying to conceal a secret no one dared to utter. Tanshi was once home to an ancient shrine dedicated to a nameless earth deity, demolished during the land reform campaigns. But some whispered that the shrine hadn't just been destroyed, it had been cursed. and whatever remained beneath the soil had not ceased to wait. Quietly but never asleep, Elena Voss, a German historian of Polish descent, had come to Tanshui to study artifacts believed to date back to the Ming Dynasty. With her brown hair tied in a neat bun and sharp, analytical eyes, Elena wasn't easily moved by folklore. She trusted documents, the words etched in stone, and fragments of broken ceramics. Yet from the moment she arrived in Tanshui, an unease settled into her. Bones. The air was thick, as though every breath carried the scent of damp earth and something ancient, decaying. The villagers stared at her strangely, not because she was a foreigner, but as though they feared she would stir something that should not be disturbed. She was housed at the home of Old Wang, a widowed woodcarver who lived at the edge of the village. Old Wang was a man of few words, but his hands, scarred from years of carving, trembled subtly every time Elena asked about the old shrine. "Don't go into the forest behind the village," he warned, his voice low and hoarse, like he feared someone might overhear. "That place isn't clean." Elena smiled, assuming he was merely repeating local superstitions. But she couldn't ignore the way he gripped his carving knife tighter whenever the forest was mentioned. On the first day, Elena ventured into the woods behind the village, the rumored site of the ancient shrine's foundation. She carried a notebook, a compass, and a small hammer for excavation. The trail was uneven, overgrown with moss and fallen leaves, as if no one had walked it in years. Eventually, she came upon a clearing and found the remnants of the shrine. A cracked stone foundation etched with faint, swirling designs. They didn't resemble any script she'd encountered, not Chinese, nor any known occult symbols. The carvings twisted like flowing water, yet the longer she stared, the more they seemed to move, alive with motion. She reached out to touch the stone and was met with a piercing chill, as though something was leaching the warmth from her skin. She snapped a few photographs and sat down to record her observations. But when she looked up again, something had changed. The patterns had shifted position, as if they had slid across the stone surface. Elena shook her head, telling herself it was just the failing afternoon light playing tricks. But as she stood, to leave, a faint sound reached her ears, not the wind, but a quiet hiss, like the breath of someone standing just behind her. She spun around, nothing, only the swaying trees and the silent, cold stone. That night, in Old Wang's cramped guest room, Elena couldn't sleep. Rain tapped steadily on the tiled roof, and she swore she heard footsteps pacing the wooden hallway, even though she knew Old Wang had gone to bed hours earlier. Then came another sound, not rain, but a soft scratching, like fingernails dragging. Across wood, she turned on her flashlight, scanning the room. Nothing but aging wooden walls and the clinging scent of damp soil. Her notebook lay open on the table, although she was certain she had closed it before bed. One page was now filled with erratic drawings, spirals, and flowing lines identical to those carved on the stone. She didn't remember making them. On the second day, Elena returned to the clearing, this time with a small shovel, determined to dig around the foundation for further clues. The clearing looked different. Denser vegetation had sprung up, as though the forest itself was trying to smother the stones. She began digging, and the soil felt oddly soft, recently disturbed. After a few minutes, her trowel struck something. She unearthed a small fragment of bone human, unmistakably with carved markings that mirrored the patterns on the shrine. She picked it up, and pain shot through her palm, sharp and sudden, like a needle prick. A drop of blood welled up and fell onto the ground, and she swore she saw the earth absorb it greedily. Like something living and parched. On the third night, Elena dreamed. In her dream, she stood inside a shrine one, unlike any she'd seen or read about. The walls were made of dark stone, covered in winding, alive patterns. At the center stood an altar, and on it rested the same bone she had unearthed. A faceless figure stood before the altar, humming a chant in an unintelligible tongue. The voice was not human, it was deep, resonant, like it echoed from within the earth itself. When the figure turned, Elena saw its eyes, if they were eyes. Twin voids, bottomless, like spiraling pits into which one could fall forever. She woke drenched in sweat and found the bone lying on her table, though she had packed it in her bag. The next morning, Elena rushed to Old Wang's workshop and told him what she had seen. The old man turned pale, his carving knife slipping from his grasp and clattering to the floor. "You touched it," he whispered. "You brought it back." When she asked what it was, he only shook his head and said she had to return the bone to its place before it was too late. "The shrine wasn't destroyed because of politics," he said, trembling. "They destroyed it to seal something. But it never sleeps." Elena didn't believe him, but the fear growing inside her was real. She returned to the clearing, determined to bury the bone beneath the stone. But when she arrived, the foundation was split wide, and from the fissure seeped a black fluid that reeked of rot and death. She threw the bone into the crack. The moment it touched the earth, the hissing returned louder, as if the entire forest had exhaled. Elena ran, but the ground beneath her feet trembled, as though something was crawling upward from below. When she reached the village, Old Wang was gone. His house stood empty, except for his carving knife on the table, now etched with the same patterns from the shrine. Elena didn't linger. She packed her things and left Tan Shui that night, without looking back. But the sound followed her not just in dreams, but in every silent moment. Years later, back in Germany, she still kept the notebook from Tan Shui. She never opened it, but some nights she heard the soft rustling of paper, like someone sketching. Once, she gathered her courage and opened the notebook, and found the pages once blank, now covered in black ink spirals. Writhing as though trying to escape the paper, Elena never returned to Tan Shui, but she could never shake the feeling that whatever she had awakened was still watching, still waiting. The remaining villagers say that on stormy nights, they see a figure standing on the shrine's ruins, holding a bone fragment with eyes like swirling voids. They no longer enter the forest. They know that though the shrine was destroyed, what lies beneath never left. Story 8. A thick fog blanketed the narrow valley where the village of Heon lay hidden, a secluded settlement deep within Guizhou province, China. During the spring of 1978, muddy, winding dirt paths led past sagging bamboo huts, where dim oil lamps flickered like dying embers. The people of Haiyan lived quietly, rarely speaking to outsiders, as if they were guarding a secret no one dared to name. The village had once hosted a small shrine devoted to a nameless deity, torn down during the chaotic years of the 1960s. The eldest villagers whispered that the shrine hadn't simply been demolished, it had been cursed. And what remained beneath the ground still waited, silent but never asleep. Jonathan Blake, an American geologist, had arrived in Haiyan to study a strange mineral deposit recently discovered nearby. With his shaggy black hair and sharp gaze, Jonathan was a man of reason, more inclined to trust numbers and rock samples than folklore. Yet from the moment he stepped into Haiyan, he felt a deep, inexplicable unease. The air was heavy, each breath laced with the scent of metal and rotting earth. The villagers watched him cautiously, not because he was a foreigner, but as if they feared he would awaken something that should remain untouched. He was housed in the home of old Zhang, an irritable blacksmith who lived at the edge of the village. Zhang's scarred hands bore the marks of fire and iron, and he made no effort to hide his discomfort when Jonathan asked about the mine. "Don't go into that tunnel," Zhang said, his voice as heavy as stone. "That place isn't meant for the living." Jonathan chuckled, thinking the old man was trying to scare him with superstitions. But he couldn't ignore the way Zhang clenched his hammer tighter every time the mine was mentioned. On the first day, Jonathan set out toward the mine, hidden deep within a cave at the valley's edge. He carried a backpack full of tools, a notebook, and a powerful flashlight. The trail to the cave was rough, strewn with jagged rocks and brittle shrubs. When he reached the entrance, he noticed how unnaturally cold the air was. Not the chill of weather, but something deeper, radiating from the earth itself. Inside, he found what he was looking for: veins of strange, dark green minerals that shimmered faintly, not reflecting light, but absorbing it. But something else stopped him: a stone wall deeper in the cave, covered in ancient carvings that resembled no Chinese characters or any script he had ever seen. The symbols spiraled like frozen currents, and when he touched them, the wall trembled faintly, pulsing as if a heartbeat thudded within it. He took out his camera and snapped a few photos, then sat down to take notes. But when he looked back, the symbols had changed. No longer spirals, they now looked like elongated scratches, as if clawed into the rock. Jonathan shook his head, blaming the shadows from the flashlight. But as he stood to leave, a sound reached. Not wind, but a faint hiss, like the breath of someone standing just behind him. He turned around. Nothing but the cave's darkness. That night, in old Jang's small guest room, Jonathan couldn't sleep. He lay awake, listening to the wind whistling through cracks in the wood, and felt as if someone stood just outside the window, even though he checked and found no one. Then came a new sound, not wind, but a faint scraping, like metal against stone. He switched on his flashlight, sweeping it across the room, but saw only dancing shadows on the wooden walls. On the table, his notebook lay open, though he'd closed it before bed. One page was filled with erratic drawing symbols identical to those carved into the cave wall. But he didn't remember drawing them. On the second day, Jonathan returned to the cave, bringing his geology hammer, intending to collect a sample from the wall. The cave seemed different now. The mineral veins pulsed with stronger light, as though alive, and the wall appeared cracked, revealing a narrow fissure. He bent down and shone his light into the gap, where he found something that made his chest tighten: a small shard of metal, sharp and etched with the same designs as the wall. As he picked it up, a sharp pain lanced through his finger, like a blade slicing skin. Blood welled up and fell to the cave floor. He swore he saw the stone absorb it greedily, like something thirsty and alive. On the third night, Jonathan began to dream. In his sleep, he stood inside a temple, one unlike anything he'd ever read about. The walls were black stone, covered in spiraling symbols, and at the center stood an altar. On it lay the same metal shard he had found. A figure's face hidden stood before the altar, chanting a song in a language he didn't understand. The voice wasn't human, it was deep, resonant, echoing as if from within the earth. When the figure turned, Jonathan saw its eyes. They were ice-twin voids, swirling black pits identical to the carvings. He woke drenched in sweat, and there, lying on the table, was the metal shard, though he had locked it away in his pack. The next morning, Jonathan went to see old John and told him everything. The old man's face went pale, his hammer falling from his hand. "You touched it," he whispered. "You brought it back." Jonathan asked what it was, but Jang only shook his head and said he needed to return the shard to where it belonged, before it was too late. "The temple didn't burn," Jang said, trembling. "It was destroyed because they tried to contain it, but it never sleeps." Jonathan didn't believe the old man, but he couldn't deny the fear rising inside him. He returned to the cave, determined to bury the shard beneath the wall. But when he arrived, the wall had split wide, and from the fissure seeped a thick black liquid, reeking of death. He threw the shard into the crevice, and the moment it struck stone, the hissing returned louder, deeper, as if the entire cave was breathing. Jonathan ran, but the ground shifted beneath his feet, like something was crawling upward from the depths. When he returned to the village, old Jang was gone. His house stood empty, and on the table lay his blacksmith's hammer, now carved with the same strange symbols as the cave wall. Jonathan didn't stay. He packed his belongings and left Haiyan that night without looking back. But the hissing followed him not just in dreams, but in every moment of silence. Years later, back in America, he still kept the notebook from Haiyan. He never opened it, but some nights he heard the sound of metal scraping stone, as if someone or something was carving again. Once, he gathered his courage and opened the notebook. The pages were no longer blank. They were covered in spiraling characters drawn in black ink, as if trying to tear their way out. Jonathan never returned to Haiyan, but he could never shake the feeling that something was still watching him, still waiting. The villagers who remain say that on fog-thick nights, they see a figure standing at the mouth of the cave, holding a shard of metal, its eyes like swirling black voids. They no longer go near the cave. They know that though the shrine was destroyed, what lies beneath has never truly left. Story 9. A fine drizzle veiled the sky, casting a misty shroud over the village of Shenju, a remote hamlet tucked deep within the mountains of Hubei, China. In the autumn of 1975, red clay roads wound between bleak stone houses, where the faint glow of paper lanterns flickered like lost fireflies. The villagers of Shenju lived in silence, withdrawn, their eyes often avoiding one another's, as if afraid that something hidden might slip out if they stared too long. The village had once housed a small shrine to an unnamed deity, torn down during the turbulent years of the Cultural Revolution. The oldest among them whispered that the shrine hadn't merely been destroyed, it had been cursed. And what remained beneath the ground still waited, still watched. Anna Kessler, an Austrian anthropologist, came to Shenjiu to study the ancient rituals native to the region. With her bright red hair and inquisitive gaze, Anna lived by stories, believing that every legend held a fragment of truth. Yet the moment she stepped foot in Shenjiu, she felt an unease she couldn't explain. The air was heavy, every breath tainted with the scent of damp earth and something decayed, something that didn't belong in this world. The villagers watched her warily, not because she was a foreigner, but as though they feared she might awaken something that ought to stay buried. She was housed in the home of old Madame Su, a widowed woman living at the edge of the village. Small and frail, Madame Su clutched a string of worn wooden prayer beads, and she didn't hide her distress when Anna asked about the ruined shrine. "Don't go near that land," she rasped, her voice like dry leaves in the wind. "It's not clean." Anna smiled, thinking the old woman was simply repeating village superstitions. But she couldn't ignore how tightly those thin fingers gripped the beads whenever the forest behind the village was mentioned. On the first day, Anna set out for the land where the shrine had once stood. She brought a notebook, a camera, and a small lantern to light her way. The path into the woods was rough, thick with moss and broken branches, as though no one had passed through in years. When she reached the clearing, she found what remained of the shrine, a large, cracked stone platform etched with strange patterns. They didn't resemble any script she'd ever seen, not Chinese, not any known sigils. They curled and twisted like tiny snakes slithering across stone, and when she touched them, the surface was ice cold, as if it were leaching warmth from her skin. She took a few photographs, then sat down to take notes. But when she looked back at the platform, she noticed something odd. The patterns had changed. No longer sinuous, they now looked like long scratches, as though clawed into the stone. Anna shook her head, blaming the dimming afternoon light. But as she stood up to leave, she heard a sound, not the wind, but a soft whisper, as if someone were murmuring right behind her. She turned, but saw only swaying branches and the silent stone slab. That night, in Madame Su's small house, Anna couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, listening to the rain tapping on the tiled roof, and felt as though someone were standing just outside the window, though she had already checked, and no one was there. Then came another sound, not rain, but a faint scratching, like fingernails against wood. She lit her lantern and scanned the room, but found only the old wooden walls and the musty scent of damp soil. On the table, her notebook was open, even though she was certain she had closed it before bed. One page was filled with crude, frantic drawings, identical to the carvings on the stone slab. But she had no memory of drawing them. On the second day, Anna returned to the site. She carried a small trowel, intending to dig around the platform for more clues. When she arrived, the clearing looked different. The undergrowth seemed denser, as if it were trying to smother the stone. She began digging, but the soil beneath her feet was oddly soft, as if recently disturbed. After a few minutes, she unearthed something that made her freeze, a fragment of ceramic, small but sharp, etched with the same patterns as the slab. As she picked it up, a sudden sting lanced through her palm like a needle prick. Blood welled up and dripped onto the earth, and she swore the ground absorbed it hungrily. Like something alive and parched. On the third night, Anna began to dream. In her dream, she stood inside a temple, but it wasn't like any temple she'd ever read about. The walls were made of black stone, covered in swirling motifs, and at the center stood an altar, upon which rested a ceramic shard identical to the one she had found. A figure stood before it, face obscured, chanting in a language she couldn't understand. The voice was not human, it was deep, resonant, as if echoing up from the ground itself. When the figure turned, Anna saw it as if they were eyes, black, swirling voids that matched the markings on the stone. She awoke drenched in sweat, and there, lying on the table, was the shard, even though she was sure she had left it in her pack. The next morning, Anna went to see Madame Sue and told her everything. The old woman turned pale, her prayer beads slipping from her hands and scattering across the floor. "You touched it," she whispered. "You brought it back." Anna asked what it was, but Madame Sue only shook her head and said the shard had to be returned to where it belonged before it was too late. "The shrine wasn't destroyed for reform," she said, her voice trembling. "It was destroyed because they tried to contain it. But it never sleeps." Anna didn't believe the old woman, but she couldn't shake the growing dread in her chest. She returned to the clearing, determined to bury the shard beneath the platform. But when she arrived, the slab had cracked wide open, and from the fissures oozed a thick black liquid, reeking of rot and death. She threw the shard into the crevice, and the moment it touched earth, the whispers returned louder now, as if the entire forest was murmuring. Anna ran, but the ground beneath her shifted, as though something was crawling up from below. When she returned to the village, Madame Sue had vanished. Her home was empty, but on the table lay her broken prayer beads, shattered into pieces. Anna didn't stay. She packed her things and left Shenjiu that very night, never looking back. But the whispers followed her, not just in dreams, but in every still moment. Years later, back in Austria, Anna still kept the notebook from Shenjiu. She never opened it, but sometimes, late at night, she heard the rustling of pages, as if someone were sketching inside. Once, she gathered the courage to look and found the once blank pages, now filled with swirling patterns, drawn in black ink. As if trying to crawl out of the paper, Anna never returned to Shenjiu, but she could never escape the feeling that something was still watching her, waiting. The remaining villagers say that on misty, drizzling nights, they see a figure standing on the old stone platform, holding a shard of ceramic, its eyes two swirling black voids. They no longer go near the forest. They know the shrine may have been destroyed, but what lies beneath the earth has never left.